Hi, bookworms. Welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and my guest today is Jeff Adams. Jeff has written stories since he was in middle school and became a published author in 2009. He writes both gay romance and LGBTQ young adult fiction, and there's usually a hockey player at the center of the story. Jeff lives in Northern California with his husband of more than 20 years, Will. Some of his favorite things include the musicals Rent and Title of Show, the Detroit Red Wings and Pittsburgh Penguins hockey teams, and the reality TV competition So You Think You Can Dance. Jeff is the co-host of the Big Gay Fiction podcast, a weekly show devoted to gay romance and pop culture. He also documents his journey to becoming a full-time author on the Big Gay Author podcast. Even though I'm not entirely sure what hockey is, I am so happy that Jeff joined me on the podcast today to tell me why The Understatement of the Year by Sarina Bowen is the best book ever. For more information on how to support this podcast, check out my Patreon. For about the cost of a latte, you can have access to exclusive interview clips that are only available to my patrons, advance access to the books we discuss, and more. Go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/bestbookever to learn more about how you can help me keep the candles burning over here in my reading cave. Now, back to the show. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, Julie. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, Jeff, I have to tell you, I'm so deeply offended by the content of this book because you made me read something that goes against my morals, and that is sports.
Sports, yeah. Sports are not for everybody.
I will say I'm really excited to talk to you about this because even the absolute sports loathing person that I am, I love this book so much.
The sports are there so almost tangentially. I mean, there's some hockey that happens, and obviously we're dealing with hockey players, but I find the way that the sports is written, it goes by fast enough and you're not bogged down in it, so it doesn't really pull the story down.
Yeah.
Which is, I have to say in my own writing, because I also write hockey romances myself, really, I think this book helped me understand how to write those scenes, because I know the sport too. So I'm not just a sort of a hockey fan. Like, I've played the sport, so I could really overdo my hockey scenes if I was so inclined. But it's like, make them only relevant to the plot. Don't like showboat a whole bunch of hockey stuff. Get in, get out, tell what you need to do to move the story, like anything else.
Yeah. I thought that the trick she had of starting each chapter with a hockey term and then a quick explanation of it, I thought that was so clever, because when I tell you I don't do sports, I mean, like, I hear people talk in sports terminology sometime and I literally have no idea what it means ever. So people will say, oh, that's a hat trick or something. And I just think, okay, I didn't know they wear hats in that sport, but okay, that's like, really? So her trick of starting each chapter with a defined hockey term, I assume they were all correct. I don't know.
They were very much correct. And it was clever what she did too, because in some way the term actually somehow connects to what's going on in the scene too.
Yes.
It was all kinds of brilliant.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was so clever. Now, are you a hockey player?
I have always been a fan since I was very young. I grew up in Michigan. And so my love of hockey started young. I did not play as a kid. I actually learned how to play in my 30s. While I was living in New York, I got the bug to play the sport that I loved. I had ended up playing on my company's softball team, and it taught me for the first time, again, in my 30s, I figured this out, that team sports was fun. And so I wanted to go learn how to do the sport, the only sport that I love, really, because I could care less about most of the other sports unless we're talking about certain Olympic events. So I went and I literally took skating lessons for like 10 weeks. And then I took hockey lessons for about 10 weeks. And then I got onto a team with the New York City Gay Hockey Association. And I played with them on various teams for like a decade until I moved out of the city and came somewhere where there was no hockey rink to play in.
And New York not only has hockey teams, but has Gay Hockey Association.
Mm-hmm. There's actually quite a few cities that have gay hockey associations. I know Chicago's got one. There's one in, oh gosh, Patrick's going to kill me. I think it's Minneapolis.
Sorry, Patrick.
There's been one in LA. There's one in Toronto. The New York City Gay Hockey Association does a yearly tournament as well that brings in players from all over the world to play.
Why is there a need for a gay hockey association?
Well, I would say it's probably less needed now than it was. Mm-hmm. But if you track back to like when I started playing in 2001, it's before the You Can Play project was created, which of course is a organization that really puts forward equality for all team sports. It was founded with hockey in mind, but it really goes well beyond hockey now and teaches inclusivity and equality, whether it's gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is. And even in New York, which is, you figure big city, should be a relatively quote unquote safe place to be. Mm-hmm. There were people who were playing hockey who would have occasionally epithets thrown around on the ice. There were people who wouldn't consider even joining a team because they weren't sure that, they couldn't be open with who they were. And so when these associations were created, it was done so to help people have a safe place to come in, learn the game potentially, or rejoin if they hadn't played in a while or whatever that was, and create that inclusive, safe space. And at least, certainly while I was in the association, we were also, we were welcoming of all. You didn't have to, proclaim your gayness or your bisexuality. You could certainly be a straight ally and come play with us. We were often known for having like the funnest teams to play on because we weren't as, I guess, we always practiced good sportsmanship on our benches and we were very supportive of each other. So it was not like, why couldn't you have done better with that? There was no raging on our own benches.
Yeah.
Screwed something up. So it was, very much that kind of environment. And you could probably maybe make the case now where it's not needed, but it also might be because there could be somebody who still, in the world that we live in, not everybody feels safe. And it can be that safe, welcoming, I'm getting into sports, relearning, learning the sport, coming back to the sport. Because it's still, there aren't that many out pro athletes. It's more prevalent in college these days, but there's still a ways to go. And it'd be nice one day if we could, eliminate the need for these associations, but one day maybe.
Not yet, though. I was trying to think of, and again, for the third time, I know nothing. But when I think about sports, and I was trying to think which one is the most macho and the most sort of that I think would be populated with sort of aggressive macho men. And I think hockey's up there. I don't know what else is like that except maybe like bull riding or I don't know.
I'd say rugby.
Hockey.
Potentially.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Hockey is certainly one of those sports where you think of the hyper masculine, aggressive, ready to pound whoever, is in the way sort of sport. And that really comes through in this book a little bit too.
Oh, yeah.
With some of the shenanigans that go on the ice in this book. And so that's what I think one of the reasons I gravitated towards hockey romance so many years ago. Not only was it the sport that I love, but it's really, especially when you go back into the early 2000s again, and even the mid 2000s, or 20 teens rather, that's where I was actually headed, that it's that juxtaposition that people don't necessarily expect. That,
Yes.
oh, you're gay and you play hockey? So it's one of those stereotypes that's always kind of fun to bust.
Yes.
Yes, gay people play hockey too.
Shocking.
I know, right?
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking as I was reading it, is that the real tension of it was that contradiction of what we expect. I have a lot of prejudices about hockey players.
Probably some
So
of
it
them
was,
well-earned based on the things
yeah.
that you can see in popular culture, and even, like some of the highlight reels that make TV sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you give our listeners a quick summary of this book, the plot of this book?
So basically, Understatement of the Year, it's book 3 in Sarina Bowen's Ivy League series. And it's really, I love what she did here, because this was the time, this book came out in 2012. And it was still a time where, for the most part, romance was still over in its own little separate subgenre. But here we have a series that books 1, 2, and I believe, and I think there's the 4th, were MF books.
Okay.
You had met Graham earlier in the series as, somebody who was on the team. And then all of a sudden in this book, you find out a lot more about Graham and all of this stuff that went on with Ricker when they were high school kids. And so it's a really interesting way that she kind of just wove that in for her audience. And in talking to people for Big Gay Fiction podcast and talking to some readers about what their gateway book is into sometimes it's this very book, because it introduced them to the genre in the middle of this other universe they were reading.
Sure.
And you see this happen from time to time, even today, where people will weave in that gay book into the lexicon of their series. Tangent, I mean, Suzanne Brockman really founded that with her troubleshooter series way back. She introduced her characters there who were gay, had them get married in the series. So that was a really big deal, going even further into the earlier 2000s, as Massachusetts was getting towards its marriage equality that they were doing. Anyway, back to this book. So you've got Ricker, who has been let go from the hockey team he was playing with because he came out. And now he ends up at Harkness College because Harkness was willing to take him in. And as soon as he walks in that locker room, he and Graham come face to face for the first time since they were in high school. They were friends. They kind of had a secret thing going on back in high school. And then one day, as they were going home, they got jumped by some homophobic assholes, if I could cuss on your podcast.
Knock yourself out.
And Ricker got severely hurt and Graham ran away. And Ricker ended up getting shipped off to live with his grandma, left town, and they hadn't seen each other. Since that happened, Graham wasn't really able to keep up with where Ricker went. And now they are thrown back together again on this team. Freaks Graham out, to say the least, because years later, he hasn't come to terms with that event. He hasn't come to terms with, at this point, whether it's bisexuality or gay. It's not stated right there at the beginning. And so everything then unfolds, how will their second chance turn out? Will it become a romance? Which of course it will, because it is a romance book. Mm-hmm. But they have to piece their relationship back together. And I love a second chance romance anyway. They're one of my favorite tropes to read. And the way that Sarina builds it back up as they figure out how to be friends again and rekindle that romance that they had very tentatively, as Graham's still trying to come to grips with, who he is, because to a large part, that whole incident back when they were in high school really changed him to the point where I think he just kind of shoved all that in a box somewhere, and it's all spilling back out again. How spoilery do we get on your show?
Well, go ahead. Say what you're going to say. And if it's super spoilery, we can cut it out.
There's a game time incident that happens. Really major head injury for Graham. And it's that moment in the hospital where everything finally ends up coming out by and large, because he has ended up with a type of amnesia where he doesn't realize what's happened at the game, and he keeps kind of flashing back to that incident. And the thing in this book that sticks with me, more than 10 years, almost 10 years on from when I first read it, is the entire thing that goes down in that hospital. It just gives me goosebumps. I'm having goosebumps right now just telling you. And then everything that kind of comes after that, as they really, from that point, kind of head towards that happily ever after and clicking everything into place between, Graham finally coming out to his mother. And I love how that happens in the simplicity of asking her to go get a cup of coffee for Ricker because Ricker happens to be in the room the morning when she shows up. The whole trip to Vermont that happens because Ricker has to go see to his grandmother who's become injured is just also, so very sweet. It feels so good, and the emotions are so just well done on the page, and it just gives me all those nice feels that I want to have in a romance.
Yeah. And there's a line in there that I want to tell you that I think was my favorite line in the entire book. They are talking about another one of their players on their team who he was afraid to come out to. And Ricker says, telling him, you don't have to worry about that guy. He's a guy who doesn't care who you get naked with. He doesn't give a damn what people think. That's a real man right there. And that line, I just thought it was so beautiful, because it's really what Graham was dealing with is, how does a man handle violence? And he's in a violent sport, and he was once in a very violent incident. And how should a man handle this? How does a friend handle this? How am I human is really their question. And Ricker's the one who tells him, this is who a man is. I thought that was the part where I started crying, because I just thought it was so beautiful in that whole acceptance of the people who love you will love you. I loved it so much.
Ricker is king of the quotes in this book, because the one that I've always really liked that happens as Graham is making his peace with everything and starting to come out is, every time you move a person into the truth column, breathing gets a little easier. Yes,
I underlined that one too. That is a good one.
I take that, and it's almost exactly, it's not exactly, it's a similar sort of thing that we saw in the Love, Simon movie when Jennifer Gardner finally tells Simon that he can breathe. It's like, there it was from Sarina like a decade earlier. Because that piece of Simon doesn't exist in the book. So that was written for the film. And it's that very same thing. Like, once you embrace yourself and you start moving those people into that column, you get to breathe a little bit more every time.
It's such a compelling image. And that image of not being able to, holding your breath, literally trying to keep something closed into your chest and not letting yourself exhale all the way. And we've all been in that situation where, we ran up a flight of stairs that were too steep or whatever. And that is a terrible physical feeling. So to read it, or to hear it also in Love, Simon, now you can breathe again. It really gives you a physical feeling of, that would be a terrible feeling to be holding your breath for how many years and not be able to fully exhale. I loved it so much. I had a really visceral response to that.
Yeah, this whole book gave me that over and over and over again. I read the book for the most part on a trip. I was traveling. I was headed to Alabama, where I went to college and lived for like over a decade between middle school and graduating college. And I was headed there to watch hockey, actually, because the University of Alabama, I had come to discover, had a hockey team. So I was very intrigued by that. And I
No
was
kidding.
headed there. Yeah, right. I was headed down to watch them play their arch football nemesis, Auburn, for a weekend tournament. And I'm reading this book on the plane, and I'm really into the book, and I don't finish it on the plane. So at the hotel, I'm reading it some more before I go to the first game. I take my iPad with me to the rink. I don't read during the game, but every intermission, I'm just like, read. And I ended up late to dinner to meet up with some friends because I had to finish the book. I was so close. There was no way I could walk away from it at that point.
Yeah. Do you remember the first book that you read that had a gay couple in it? I was trying to think. I can't remember it. And I read a lot, and I read really widely when I was in high school, but I don't remember gay couples in the books that I read.
You know, they're so hard to find for so long. I think I'm 99% sure that the first gay couples I read on the page were put in my hands by my husband when we started dating.
Mm-hmm.
So this would have
been. So you were an adult.
Yeah. Because I spent so much time in Alabama, I don't think that I would have put my hands on those books because I didn't come out until I started dating him.
Oh, okay.
So, and certainly living there, I would have been very cautious what I was putting my hands on if I thought it might, you know, lean in that direction. I can think of some movies that I saw that kind of had some tangential content in it. But some of the first books I could remember reading, the one that sticks out the most is The Front Runner from Patricia Nell Warren. Not a romance, because it ends quite tragically, but it's set with an Olympic track star and his coach. Bestseller at the time, though. Groundbreaking at the time, certainly. But it also was very much in the realm of, as beautiful as the story was, that, you know, the gay characters suffer at some point. And in this case, the lead here does get killed because of what comes out with the relationship that he's in. Because it wasn't really until probably the 2010, 2011 that romance started to become a genre of its own. Mm-hmm. And then you start to find the books similar to what we have today. The first that I read around that, one of the first I remember reading, I think it's just called St. Nachos, which is part one of, it's book one in a series that's set in this fictional California town called St. Nachos, written by Z.A. Maxfield. It's magical. This place is kind of like a healing location of a sort for just reasons. I mean, it's not a paranormal book or anything, but it's just, it's a place that you can go to kind of heal your soul. And those St. Nachos books are just amazing.
You know, well, I mean, they're more prevalent, I think, in all genres, but in particular, who I think is really killing it is traditionally published YA books. My 16-year-old daughter, I call her my book whisperer. Everything she picks out and hands to me has a gay or bisexual main character, and they're not all romances, not even close. But gosh, they're so good, and they are just, I'll tell you, these young people, they are killing it with their books. They just are not afraid of topics.
I think you can really track some of that back to Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda, which came out, I want to say 2015, maybe, as really one of the books that leads the way to that. I mean, I've just read 2 YAs in the past 2 weeks that are both very queer. TJ Clune's The Extraordinaries. That book was amazing. And I've been a big fan of TJ's for a long time. and Elsie Rosen's Camp, which takes place at a summer camp for LGBTQ plus kids.
Oh, okay.
That book was just amazing. And I can't imagine how things could be different for a whole generation had that book existed 10, 15 years ago. But we're finally just now in a time where it can be out there. And that's another Big Five released YA book.
I think about that a lot too. Like these kids get to grow up with these books as they're maybe not quite normal yet, but getting there. Not uncommon anyway.
Yeah, I mean, TJ has said on our show that he wrote The Extraordinaries for his younger self because the book with the neurodiverse queer kid didn't exist for him. And so he's written it now for the queer kids that need it.
So those two books you just mentioned, those are not hockey books.
No.
So you don't only read sports romance.
Oh, no.
It's just your favorite?
It's certainly right up there. A hockey book done well makes me very happy. V.L. Losey and R.J. Scott do such an amazing writing together and separately. They've got all these hockey books out there that are so good that they explore so many different themes within their books. And they have whole teams that they've created to set these books inside too. It's really quite remarkable.
All right. I'm going to ask you a really personal question. Tell me the truth. What the hell is so great about hockey?
You know, for me, what makes it good for me is it's fast, for one thing. Those people are flying up and down the ice, you know, and chasing this little
Does it feel dangerous while you're flying up? Does it feel a little scary?
It can. I mean, I was never flying at NHL level ever. I was way too old to be that fast when I started. But you watch these guys just zipping down the ice. You know, it took a long time for me to be able to just make my brain fire fast enough to, here comes the puck. I've got to take the puck. I got to move with the puck. I got to shoot the puck. I got to pass the puck. There's a lot of, you know, going on there.
So it seems like the appeal of it is this real tension between this aggressive speed and also precision of a pretty, I actually have no idea. I'm holding my hand up like I know how big a hockey puck is. Well, it's like donut size, right?
Yeah, and a tiny donut at that. Maybe a Dunkin' donut. You know, this is not a giant donut. Okay. Did you expect me to have a puck on my desk?
I have a donut on my desk. But it seems to me that the appeal of it then is really that mental precision of it and dexterity, and also just that incredible speed that seems required for it.
Yeah, that's a much better summary than I did of it.
Listen, for me, it's all academic because I'm not actually going to put skates on.
And your perception of the game does change after you play it too, because you get more of the mechanics.
Will you tell me a little bit about your podcast? You have two, right?
Yes. My husband and I run two podcasts. We've got the Big Gay Fiction podcast, which is careening past 250 episodes. From July 20th, there'll be our 250th episode. And we'll celebrate 5 years come November. It's a podcast for readers and, well, for avid fans of gay romance fiction. That gay romance is our primary thing that we cover. We also talk about pop culture, so we'll talk about movies and TV that's fit under the LGBTQ umbrella. I will review YA in the show as well because I love YA. And occasionally books that might be written by gay authors. Maybe it's not a gay romance or even gay fiction, but it's written by a gay author. So we'll bring in other things that we're really excited to talk about. And then the other show that we have is the Big Gay Author podcast, which is our journey towards becoming full-time authors. So we talk about what we're doing, what our projects are, how we go about the writing, the editing. We'll have guests on who are authors talking to us about their process, or if they've written like nonfiction books. This past week we had Daniel Wilcox, who is an author of horror, but he also has a podcast for authors and just recently wrote a book about collaboration. So we had him on our show, on the author show, to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. What prompted you to start the fiction podcast?
Because we were talking about books all the time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we love the genre. There's a lot of romance podcasts out there, more now than there were when we started Big Gay Fiction Podcast. But the gay romance area is still underserved. It's us. There's another show, the Author Podcast, gayromance.show, who they release episodes periodically. We're out there every week talking about books, interviewing authors, and bringing that to our listeners. And hopefully, as people find out about our show and being inside the Frolic Podcast Network, hopefully other people start to find the genre and get turned on to these really great books. If you're reading romance, there's really no reason not to read gay romance, because there's a subgenre of gay romance that's out there that fits what you're reading, because there's historicals and there's sports and there's paranormal and contemporary and all these various subgenres that exist in MF romance.
Who's the main audience for gay romance? Because I'm always shocked how many straight women write and read it.
And that is very much the primary audience. Is
it really?
Yes, 100%. I mean, I don't think the demographic is much different than MF romance.
Okay.
Because romance historically is a female-dominated genre.
Sure.
And the numbers continue to be that way for the readers and the authors of MM romance too. Charlie David, who is an actor, author, director, producer, did a documentary on this at last year's Gay Romlit, which is the big gay romance reader event that happens. The documentary is called What Women Want, Gay Romance, streaming on Prime and some other places. It really kind of digs into why some of that is, why women are the primary consumers and writers of the genre.
Yeah. I've read quite a lot of MM romance, and I can kind of tell when it's written for me as a straight woman and when it is not written for me. There's a real, and I think all kinds of books need to exist, the windows and the mirrors. And I kind of don't like it and I did not feel like that with this book. I thought this book was great. And I didn't think this one was directed at straight women. I thought this was a book that you'd want to give to your teenage kids.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little explicit perhaps, but maybe not, because
it is definitely explicit. Yeah. No, it is, but it's also told from the direction of, this is for you. This is a book for you, not for me.
Why do you think that is? Now I'll interview you a little bit.
Yeah.
Turn the tables. What is it that you think is that you're finding between the book that's written for you and the one that's not?
Sometimes I find that if you switched out to a male and female character, everything is exactly the same as all of the other romances I read. And they all end with a traditional hetero definition of love and someone taking care of someone else, and someone's going to be a stay-at-home mom at the end. And I think, and I'm not saying those shouldn't exist, because gay couples should exist in whatever system they want to exist in. But I also think, this one was written just to mirror another structure. And I did not feel that way about the Understatement of the Year. I felt like this is very much talking about who are you going to be in your life? How are you going to define your life? and we don't have to follow anyone else's rules. I felt this was very much aimed, well, it was fantastic to read as a straight woman. I thought this is very much aimed at a young gay kid, maybe a young gay sports kid. That's why I think I responded to it so much. I just loved it so much because that seemed to me, and I don't know, again, I'm reading from the point of view of a straight person. So
Sure.
it's just the impression that I get as I read some of them.
There's the lens that's there, and you certainly point out what we hear, and even that documentary touches on a little bit, is there's a shift in the power dynamic that can happen when you put two men in the romance, because it's certain, there are certain, if you're the woman reading the woman in the book, there's, I guess, a projection that kind of happens there a little bit. And when you take that woman out of the romance and you have two men, then you can't necessarily put yourself into either one of those characters anymore. And it's interesting how that, surfaces in these conversations over and over again. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, I can't view it from that lens at all. As the gay guy, I look at these two and go, oh, that is so sweet. I'm so glad they found they're happy. Because, from my point of view, I love the books that put out there that gay people can have a happy, fulfilling life, whether it is mirroring heteronormative and setting up house and looking at adoption and getting married and all that stuff, or whether it's just leaving the book and knowing those two are never going to separate again, even if there's not necessarily a wedding or even a proposal. But I'm all for the weddings too.
Oh no, me too.
I love a good schmoopy wedding.
I do too. I love them all. I want all the happy endings. I just am always so curious that so many straight women are writing these books for straight women. And I guess I just want more voices out there always, but that's what I want for every single genre of book.
Yeah. And I can think of a good handful, at least, of gay men who are writing these books. There is the thin line that can run between romance and fiction, and where some gay men authors will go is towards fiction and tell a romantic story. But it would be to their detriment to label it a romance, because they're either not hitting the tropes, or they're not minding the tropes, or perhaps they're not doing an HEA.
There is a book I read last year that, again, my daughter gave me, a YA book. Have you heard of They Both Die at the End? Did you like it?
Oh, I did. Yeah, totally.
Oh, thank God. Oh my God. I thought it was so beautiful. And I would call it a romance, even though, it says in the title what happens at the end, but I loved it so much. And I thought it was so sweet and wonderful.
But you can imagine that if you gave that to somebody who is a voracious romance reader, they'd go, well, that's not a romance, because there's no HEA. You killed both of them.
I know. No, you could never call it romance. Absolutely not. But gosh, it's a romantic book.
Another Adam Silvera book called History Is All You Have Left Me, I think is what it's called. That's very similar. It opens with the person who should have been the HEA person. We know that they've died. And then it's like the opposite of that. It's the one who's been left behind, who then has to go piece all of it together, kind of what happened. And you see big areas of the romance that they had in the book.
Yeah.
One of the big juxtapositions ever was that Adam Silvera and Becky Albertalli wrote a book together, What If It's Us? And Adam didn't get to kill anybody.
Oh, poor guy. So tell me, what are you reading right now?
I'm about to start Alexis Hall's boyfriend material. I love The Extraordinaries. I loved Camp. I'm super excited that Camp's going to become, I believe it's a movie, has already been announced. So that's going to be super cool. It's always great when queer YA gets turned into movies or TV or whatever.
And you really, I think I saw this on your social media. You really liked the television adaptation of, was it Simon? Simon?
Yeah, Love
But it's
Victor.
not called Simon.
Love
That's
Victor.
what it's called.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did. I loved it.
I haven't watched it yet. My daughter watched it, but she didn't like it because she's very, very attached to the book and the Love, Simon movie. And she didn't like this. Is it a side story?
It's essentially a sequel in some ways.
Okay.
So it's an extension of the Simon verse because this is a new kid who's arrived at Creekwood to go to high school and is trying to decide to make over here, not really make over, but maybe finally be able to embrace who he is. And one of the first things he hears about when he arrives is this kid, Simon, who did all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And he actually messages Simon on Instagram, and Simon starts talking back to him. And you actually get the actor who played Simon in the film answering him back. And in episode 8, you actually had Simon and Bram with Victor together. It was everything my Simon heart could ever want.
Oh, I'm going to check it out. Oh, I love that book so much.
I would also say something I've read this in the last month or so, Finding Joy from Adriana Herrera. Super sweet romance. First of all, Adriana Herrera can apparently do no wrong by me. Her Dreamer series, which is 4 books, 3 of which are MM, 1 is MF. Such amazing stories of people living right now. They're dealing with issues around things like Black Lives Matter, because she populates this world with authors of with people of color because she is an author of color. She writes, she gets these characters, she knows who they are. She writes such good love stories. I mean, all the romances in her books are just wonderful. What I really love about Finding Joy is it's set in Ethiopia. Homosexuality is illegal in Ethiopia. So they've got to be super careful with what they're doing. And it was not only is the romance good, but she's written it in a way because Adriana has been there, lived there a little bit. And she presents the country in a way, for most of us in the US, we hear about it as a really poor place where there's a lot of poverty and a lot of hunger. She breaks beyond all that. There's clearly that problem because there are aid workers working on that. But there's this whole there's a thriving culture there. And, not everybody is suffering. There's life that happens. There's joy that happens. So it was a little bit travelogue, a little bit wonderful romance. And it was just it's definitely on my list of favorite books of the year so far. The other one that I'll call out is The Hideaway Inn from Philip William Stover. It's about this guy who comes back to his hometown with the intention of flipping an inn. He's bought this inn. He wants to fix it up just enough to sell it and make the money back. Of course, one of the first people he meets when he gets to town, meets up with, is the boy he had a crush on in high school. Vince has put on so much armor because being gay was just not acceptable when he was in school, and he's built up all this armor over time to be butch, and he knows he's gay and he doesn't hide that, but he's butch and he's tough and he's like doesn't put up with anything from anybody. But being back home and being around Tack, that armor starts to come off and he's able to be, the person he's supposed to be. Great small town second chance romance, made me so happy.
I'm so envious of young people, in all honesty, that they have access to this. And even if, like you said, if they're growing up in Arkansas in a place where they wouldn't actually put their hands on a book or be seen putting their hands on a certain book, they now have the option to buy a Kindle so nobody sees that they are reading LGBTQ romance. I love that so much. It makes me so happy for them in the future because they're just going to change everything.
Yeah. Hide it on your Kindle, hide it in an audiobook.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I love it. I'm already seeing it. My kids are so different. Them and their friends, they're just so different. I love it so much.
Yeah. It's great to see how it's impacting them already. We did a huge, essentially a literary festival on our podcast for Pride Month. So in addition to the 6 episodes we would have normally had in June, we did 15 others.
Oh, wow.
And one of the people we had on was Sarah Wendell from Smart Podcast Trashy Books. Because she has such a large history in romance. We wanted to have her come on and talk about some of her favorite books in the genre. And when we were setting up the interview, she's like, I think my son wants to come on and recommend a book. Is that okay? Well, sure. And her 12-year-old came on and talked to us about a book. And it's just like, oh my God, that is so awesome that at that age,
amazing. Yeah.
You already know and are forming this idea of who you are.
Yeah.
And you've got a book you want to talk to us about it.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah, incredible. I mean, the thing of it is, I'm not blind. I know that things are not great for a lot of people right now, but I just think if they are growing up where it's a normal part of their cultural experience, where they are used to seeing gay characters. And I think of these kids and I just think, what are they going to do when it is time for them to change policies? And it's not going to be, I hope, this is my hope, maybe I'm being too Pollyanna, but I hope everything's not going to be such a fight because they're just going to go, well, yeah, this is how it is. This is
we can hope.
I know. Don't even get me started. I'll start with the F words.
That's what the explicit tag is for.
That's right. Yeah. Well, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
So really the hub, I guess, for everything is jeffandwill.com. You can find out about the podcasts, link to the podcast website. You can find out about the books and I that Will individually write. And it's all right there on the homepage, and you can branch off to wherever you want to go find stuff out about.
All right. Well, great. This has been really fun. I'm so delighted to finally meet you and that we got to talk about this. And I'm just thrilled that you introduced me to this beautiful book. I loved it so much.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening, book nerds. For more information on this episode and links to all the books we discussed, please go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, or follow the podcast on Instagram at bestbookever. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it on social media and leave a review on whatever podcatcher you use. Reviews really help our visibility to new listeners, and we are grateful for everyone. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.